Breaking tonight, North America's trade architecture is about to be torn apart. Trump didn't negotiate, he threatened. And Carney, he saw every single move coming. Tensions are escalating between Washington and Ottawa tonight. The Trump administration is openly floating the idea of scrapping the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement entirely, replacing it with separate bilateral deals that would leave Canada isolated on the outside. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer told the New York Times this month that the president is, quote, half inclined to leave the agreement altogether. Everyone believed Trump held all the cards. Wall Street assumed Canada would buckle under tariff pressure. Trade analysts expected Ottawa to come crawling back with concessions on dairy, digital regulation, and energy policy. Washington was certain that threatening to cut Canada out of the continental trade framework would bring Mark Carney to his knees. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, February 2026. Behind closed doors, two senior Canadian officials involved in trade discussions with Washington made a stunning admission to the New York Times. Expectations for a full USMCA renewal? Very low. But here's the part Washington didn't anticipate. Carney's team isn't panicking. They're questioning whether Canada can even trust any fresh trade agreement with Trump at all. Translation: Canada isn't begging to stay in the deal. Canada is deciding whether the deal is even worth having. And what happened next? The country that was supposed to be desperate, the country Trump called a future 51st state, reveals exactly why Canadian sovereignty strategy is already 3 moves ahead of Washington's chaos, while Trump's pressure tactics collapse under their own contradictions. Dear viewers, let me walk you through exactly how we got here, because the story the mainstream media is telling you is incomplete. They're showing you the threats. I'm going to show you the chess game. February 9th, 2026. Trump took to social media with a new weapon, a bridge. Not a military asset, not a trade barrier, a bridge. The Gordie Howe International Bridge connecting Detroit to Windsor, a critical piece of cross-border infrastructure set to open this year. Hours earlier, the billionaire owner of a competing bridge had met with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. And suddenly, Trump wanted to block the new crossing unless Canada made trade concessions. Now here's what you need to understand. Officials familiar with Trump's thinking told reporters he wasn't particularly passionate about the bridge itself. What excited him was the leverage, another pressure point, another weapon to swing at Ottawa. But think about what this actually reveals. The President of the United States is trying to block infrastructure that would benefit American businesses, American truckers, and American supply chains, just to score a negotiating point against Canada. This isn't strategy. This is improvisation, and Carney's team knows the difference. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Trump administration began meeting with Mexico about the trade deal back in January. Mexicans say they're optimistic. Meanwhile, Canada, left waiting, deliberately frozen out. Sound familiar? It should. This is the exact same playbook from Trump's first term. In early 2018, Jamieson Greer, the same man running negotiations now, traveled to Mexico to hold secret conversations without Canada's knowledge. Washington proposed a bilateral deal with Mexico and told Canada to get on board or get left behind. And what happened? 1 minute before the deadline, Canada squeezed out a concession and made one of its own. A deal was struck. Canada wasn't eliminated, it was underestimated. But here's the critical difference between 2018 and 2026. In 2018, Canada was caught off guard. In 2026, Mark Carney has spent an entire year building the architecture of Canadian independence. The divide and conquer tactic only works when the target is afraid of being divided. And Carney? He's been dividing Canada's trade dependence away from America since the day he took office. Let's talk about what Trump's team calls irritants. Because these so-called irritants are actually the proof that Carney's strategy is working. First, the China deal. Last month, Carney traveled to Beijing and struck a modest tariff agreement. Trump's response? He threatened 100% tariffs on Canadian goods and claimed China would take over Canada and even ban hockey. The hockey line alone tells you everything about how seriously to take the economic analysis coming out of this White House. But the China deal wasn't about the tariff numbers. It was about the signal. Canada is diversifying. Canada is building relationships outside the American orbit. And every time Trump screams louder about it, he confirms exactly why Carney is doing it. Second, Davos. Carney stood on the world stage in Switzerland and declared that the era of a U.S.-led global order was over, that middle powers like Canada should band together to defend their interests. Trump's response the next day was venomous. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark. But here's what Trump doesn't understand. That speech wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at Europe, at Asia, at every middle power watching the American-led system crack apart. Carney was recruiting. He was building the coalition that makes Canadian independence viable, not just symbolically, but economically. Third, and this is crucial, the digital services tax. Canada dropped its planned digital services tax as a concession to keep trade talks on track. The United States had criticized it heavily. Carney gave ground. And what happened? The concession didn't advance talks at all. Washington pocketed it and kept pushing. That moment right there taught Ottawa everything it needed to know. Concessions don't buy goodwill with this administration. They buy contempt. And Carney's team absorbed that lesson completely. Now let's look at the data, because numbers don't lie even when politicians do. Trade data released Thursday showed the U.S.-Canada trade deficit shrank to $46.4 billion in 2025, down from $62 billion the year before. On the surface, that looks like Trump's tariffs are working. But look closer. Both imports and exports fell. The United States bought less from Canada and sold less to Canada. That's not a win. That's mutual economic damage. American farmers, American automakers, American manufacturers, they're all feeling the pain of a shrinking trade relationship that used to generate trillions of dollars in activity. And here's the part nobody in Washington wants to admit. The current USMCA arrangement leaves most U.S.-Canada trade tariff-free. Trump himself created major exemptions last year for goods following USMCA rules. Companies rushed to trade under those terms, significantly bringing down the average U.S. tariff rate. Scrapping the agreement doesn't just hurt Canada, it detonates the framework that's keeping American consumer prices from exploding. The Trump administration wants Canada to concede on dairy, on provincial liquor policies, on digital regulation. They're furious that Ontario and other provinces pulled American liquor off government-controlled shelves last year in retaliation for tariffs. They want those protections dismantled. But let me ask you something. What exactly is Washington offering in return? Because from where I'm sitting, the American negotiating position looks like this. Give us everything we want, except our tariffs on your lumber, your steel, your aluminum, your autos, and be grateful we're even talking to you. That's not negotiation. That's extortion. And Mark Carney was elected last spring on a single, crystalline promise to stand up to exactly this. He wanted to break us, Carney said about Trump, so that America can own us. That's not rhetoric, that's a diagnosis. And the prescription is already being administered. Dear viewers, here's the insight that pulls this entire story together. Every single thing Trump is angry about, the China visit, the Davos speech, the liquor shelves, the refusal to roll over on dairy, these aren't problems. These are symptoms of a Canada that is no longer controllable. Trump's escalating threats aren't a sign of American strength. They're a sign of American frustration. When you have real leverage, you don't need to threaten bridges. You don't need to talk about 51st states. You don't need to claim that hockey will be banned. You negotiate, quietly, effectively, the way Carney has been doing with Beijing, with Brussels, with every partner willing to treat Canada as a sovereign nation rather than an economic territory. The text of the USMCA says the review must be completed by July 2026. That's 5 months from now. 5 months to renegotiate trillions of dollars in continental trade, with a president who calls the agreement irrelevant and a trade representative who helped write it but now wants to tear it apart. The Canadian government is preparing for long, bumpy, and dramatic talks with a hostile U.S. administration. They're preparing for a possible breakup of USMCA. But here's the thing Washington hasn't grasped. Carney has been preparing for this since the moment he took office. Every trade diversification deal, every diplomatic relationship rebuilt, every sovereign economic initiative launched over the past year was designed for precisely this moment. Trump thinks he's pushing Canada out of the game, but Carney already built a new game, and Canada is playing it on its own terms. This isn't the end of Canadian trade. This is the beginning of Canadian independence, from reliance to resilience. And no amount of bridge threats, tariff tantrums, or social media tirades is going to reverse what's already in motion. If you believe in a strong, sovereign, independent Canada, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell, because this story is accelerating and we're going to be here for every single chapter. This is Canada Next.